Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is the author of 2 Backstage novels, One More Seat at the Round Table, a novel of Camelot, and The Voice I Just Heard. Her passion for the performing arts is rooted in her first career. After earning a humanities degree from Michigan State University, she was a publicist for the Goodspeed Opera House in Connecticut, Syracuse Stage, and the Joffrey Ballet in New York. After moving to Washington, D.C., she launched a freelance writing business, creating publications for banks, hospitals, and schools for 10 years. She's now finishing a novel about the American icon, Annie Oakley, marquee star of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Susan Dormady Eisenberg.
Thank you, Julia. I just have to thank you so much for having me. If there weren't people like you, authors would never be able to get the word out. I'm deeply grateful.
Well, thank you, Susan. I'm excited to have you here today. I love speaking to publicists because we certainly need those.
Oh, I was a publicist dyed in the wool for quite a while, and I think it's helping me promote my book. We could get into that, but
yes. Our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I have a really good answer for that. And I think Authors Over 50 is such an important idea. There is some kind of conventional wisdom that people do their best work when they're 25. You know, we have some major wunderkinds out there who did, maybe Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Philip Roth. But I think that in order to have something meaningful to say in a novel, you have to live. So what took me so long to write my novel, I actually started my first novel when I was 42, was living and gathering information. And frankly, I tried to write fiction earlier than that, and it wasn't very good. I really didn't know enough about life. A novel has to reflect life, human experience, relationships. And how do you write about those things if you're very, very young and you haven't lived?
I certainly agree. And I don't think that many of our books would be the same books if we had written them at age 30.
They wouldn't be. And certainly mine wouldn't be. Even though, interestingly enough, I'm looking at younger protagonists in both of my books, and Annie certainly was young. But on the other hand, it's an older person looking at a young person and interpreting and trying to put yourself in the shoes of that person. It's a little bit easier when you've had a few miles.
That's so true. I think our hindsight and our wisdom from living life certainly changes our stories.
Definitely. And for me,
enriches them, really.
I can't tell you enough how much I really had to live. And also, my books have a little bit of comedy, particularly One More Seat at the Round Table. It's really funny. It's meant to be a rom-com, but it's about the travails of Camelot. And a lot of what happened was maybe not funny to the people when it happened, but it's funny looking at it now. And so I just feel like I have to also have my maturity to look at what's funny and to portray it correctly.
Well, when you first wrote that book, did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
Well, the Camelot book went out to 84 agents. It was well received. People liked the concept. They also liked the writing. And this has really been a chord that's repeated in my writing career over and over. The last agent who looked at it was rather impressive. And she was at William Morris, I believe, a young, wonderful agent. And she said, "You're a wonderful writer. No thanks." And so I said to myself at that point, and we were at the end of the process, she'd looked at my full manuscript, and I thought, if I'm a wonderful writer and I believe in my story, I got to get it out there. So that is when I sought a hybrid press, and I went with a very fine hybrid press, Atmosphere. What attracted me to Atmosphere Press, first and foremost, was that the very first thing they did was a developmental edit. Every author needs a developmental edit. If you're going to self-publish, you need to pay for one. I paid for one through a hybrid press, but that was the first step. And it wasn't just a one-time edit, it was a double edit. I made my changes, it went back to the editor, it had to pass through her. That showed me that they were interested in quality. And then everything else they did was top of the line. So you are looking at a very happy author, because most importantly, I want my work to be professional. If I'm a wonderful writer, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to brag. I think many, many writers are wonderful writers, but they don't have an opportunity to be heard in today's market. But if my writing is to be viewed as I hope it is, really good writing, then it has to look good. It has to be well presented. And Atmosphere did that for me.
I think editing is just crucial. And I think writing is rewriting, and we have to make many, many passes through our manuscripts and sometimes be very brutal about the editing process, kill off our darlings, but it becomes a much stronger work after that.
I want to say that in the very end, after the developmental edit, when I was rethinking it, because you can't imagine the number of times I read this book, I cut 5,000 words. Now that was a chunk, but it wasn't in just one section. It was all throughout the book, 250 words here, 500 there, but it was a stronger book. Yeah. If you can actually cut 5,000, those words didn't need to be there.
No. That's so true. And I think sometimes we don't tighten the novels up, and it slows down our readers' experience in the book.
The pace. I wanted the pace to be tight. It is tight. And well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my first novel in a moment, because I'm doing something interesting with that right now along these same lines.
Well, let's talk about that, because I want to know, when you wrote that novel, how did you proceed with it?
Okay, this is The Voice I Just Heard, and it is a coming-of-age novel about a young woman who loses her brother in Vietnam. Vietnam, in my era, was one of the central factors of life as I was coming of age myself. It was huge, and very tragic for many, many American families. I wanted to capture that in a novel, even though my own family had not gone through that tragedy. But I did have a pen pal in Vietnam who died just before I graduated from high school. He was a 19-year-old Marine named Mark Vanderhyde, and it stayed with me all those years until I was 40, and that's when I decided to write that book. My process was, I wrote the book over a period of years. It really took a long time. I was a late bloomer as a mom. I had, my first child came to me at 42. I adopted her because I was infertile, my husband and I. But anyway, having a new baby was perfect for writing a novel, because if she was growing and she was sleeping, I was writing. And then, of course, she went to school. At the end of the period of writing, I did send it off to agents. And it was a very different time in publishing. My gosh, I was read by so many agents and really top agents. Now, humorously, the book ran 160,000 words. No, I'm sorry, 130,000 words, 600 pages. I was a naif. Agents came back to me, including great agents like Elaine, I think it was Elaine Markle. She said, no one's going to take a novel by a first novelist at this level. So here's what I did. Speaking of being able to slash your work, I took a 600-page novel and slashed it down to 300. I cut out the second 2/3 of the book. And friends said, this won't work. And I said, yes, it will, because what I've decided to turn it into is the coming of age part. She doesn't have to continue on. I cut it down to about 300 words. And guess what? I got an agent, a really good agent. Then my agent, who's still an agent, helped me edit the book. She was a fine editor. I think I must have rewritten it 4 times. It was ready to go. I'm not sure exactly what happened. She never sent the book out. We parted ways in a positive way, but I was a little heartbroken about the whole thing. So that's when I decided to self-publish it through Amazon, their KDP program. And, you know, it was first rate. I have no complaints whatsoever. The book did okay. It found a lot of readers. But Amazon KDP, or Create Space as it was known, requires you to do a DIY approach to publishing. And I felt this time around, I needed a little more help. So in other words, I didn't want to have to hire a cover designer. I wanted them to give me one. I didn't want to hire an editor, and my agent had been my editor. I wanted them to do it. And so that's why I chose to go with a hybrid this time.
Well, that was certainly a great learning experience, though, because you really were in the trenches and learned so much.
I made so many mistakes.
You said
but
300 words, but you meant 300 pages earlier.
I'm sorry. I shut it down to 3. Excuse me. I cut it down to 300 pages.
You could have made a series out of that book.
Some of my friends who read that book still prefer the longer version. But they're your friends, you know. Now, I want to say about that. So my agent had me give it a certain ending, and she was right in one sense. But I never really liked the ending of The Voice I Just Heard. I liked the book proper, but as my heroine grew and moved into the world of opera, because it is about a singer, I felt the book got off the track. So guess what I'm doing now? I'm rewriting The Voice I Just Heard, and I'm giving it the ending it should have had all along. But let's go back to that concept about being older. I wrote The Voice I Just Heard when I was 40. I am now 73. I now understand what the book needs, and I know how the book went off the track. It really went off the track at the end. Now it's going to be exactly what it should have been all along, but I didn't have the knowledge or the expertise to do it. So next year, I'm putting out a new version of The Voice I Just Heard through Atmosphere Press with the right ending, the right ending.
You're the first person I've heard who's revisited a first novel. You know, most
Really?
people stick them in their drawers, and I'm glad that you're going to refresh yours and bring it out.
It meant so much to me. It was so important to me. And I do want to say why. The Voice I Just Heard and One More Seat at the Round Table, they both revolve around the issue of vocation. To me, this is a major part of being human, is choosing the right way to spend your life. And for most of us, it is one of the hardest decisions there is. Look at me. I went into publicity, then I went into freelance writing, then I became an arts journalist, then I wrote novels. And the reason was I didn't have the nerve to write novels early on, and maybe I didn't have enough to say. But it's so important that we figure out who we were meant to be.
Did writing that first book change your process of writing? Did you learn from it so that you
Yes.
could write the second book?
Yes. Because I said, I will never be writing another 600-page book again. Now, that kind of book is popular for some. There are some historical novels. Let's talk about Ken Follett, Pillars of the Earth. Okay, there are 1,000-page novels. Maybe Herman Wouk did those. James Michener did those. Hawaii. But that's not the kind of writer I am. And a coming-of-age novel really shouldn't be 600 pages. So when I started the Camelot novel, I said, this one is going to come in at about 100,000 words or less. And that's why I cut the 5,000 words, because it was under 100,000 words when I finished, when I edited.
Well, what was the inspiration for the Round Table novel and now for your Annie Oakley novel?
Well, the Camelot book, I fell in love with Camelot when I was young, but you mentioned that I worked as a publicist at the Goodspeed Opera House. I was madly in love with Camelot from the time I was a teenager, just the show. I saw it as a very young teenager. As a matter of fact, I saw it 1 month in Schenectady, New York, before John F. Kennedy was killed. Later, it became associated with the Kennedys, and we could talk about that or not. But anyway, in 1974, I was working on a show called Shenandoah. It was my first job at Goodspeed, and I was taking the actor John Cullum all over Connecticut. John was the star of the show, and it was only 14 years since Camelot. He had understudied Richard Burton and played Sir Dinadan. Well, he had the most phenomenal stories. And we had a lot of time to kill in that car driving all over Connecticut. So he told me the stories. I didn't write them down. I'll get around. Later, John became such a big star that he committed many of the stories to Columbia Masterworks, and they're on YouTube now. So when I was researching, I could go back and relive those stories. But then Lerner's memoir came out in 1978, and believe it or not, I had been studying voice all those years, and I had the opportunity to do a production of Camelot, playing Guinevere. Now, I was no great shakes. That was my first and last time on the stage. I made up my mind, you are meant to write, not to perform. However, what came out of it that was so fantastic was we had the original Broadway sets. And every time I did it, I only did it about 10 times, I guess, I would climb up on this platform to watch the jousts between the knights, the one where Lancelot kills Sir Lionel. And I think Julie Andrews stood here. This is phenomenal to me. I'm here where Julie Andrews stood. That's what stayed in my mind. Flash forward to the year 2010, it was the 50th anniversary of Camelot. And I was writing for Huffington Post, and I got to interview Stone Whitney, who was Alan J. Lerner's right arm. He told me everything I needed to know. I knew it had to be a novel. Now, it took me a few more years. I started writing Camelot, my novel about Camelot, in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. Everyone else was sad. Everyone was feeling very depressed that they had to stay inside. I was jubilant. I'd never had more fun in my life. I was just in the world of Camelot for about 1.5 years. And the other funny thing was that nobody was working in their office. So if I had questions, I could actually reach people during my research. And I had the time of my life. Now, plot-wise, I was introducing 2 protagonists, a young production assistant and an actor playing Sir Lionel. And they were trying to have a romance in the middle of pure chaos. When Camelot went from New York rehearsals to Toronto, it ran 4 hours. Critics called it Götterdämmerung without laughs. It was a train wreck.
Wow.
So here's what I did. I used actually what happened, and 90%, maybe 95% of the plot that revolves around Camelot is real. I used the real people. I used Richard Burton, Julie Andrews, Roddy McDowell and Bobby Goulet. They called him Bobby, Robert Goulet. And then I changed the names of some of the minor people and some of the production people to give me more fictional leeway. But the stuff about Camelot, all of its travails, it's all true. So in a way, it's a theatrical history as well as a novel.
That's fascinating. What about Annie Oakley?
Well, Annie, I actually did the Annie book. It's all written. I did it before I wrote the Camelot book. And I worked on it from 2013 till 2020, which is 7 years of my life. I did the research first. I went to Greenville, Ohio, and saw all the Annie Oakley sites, just where she's from. She is not a Western woman. She is a Midwestern woman. And Annie Oakley was a lovely Victorian lady who liked to sit in her performance tent and embroider when she wasn't on stage. She didn't have a violent bone in her body, but she had an Olympic level shooting talent. No one could top her. And the one person it drove wild that she was this amazing shooter was William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill, who formed the Buffalo Bills Wild West. And he and Annie kind of came to loggerheads when the company went to Europe because they were shooting for royalty, for the Queen, and Annie was the belle of the ball. he didn't like it. So that was really the crux of the book, is how they worked out their relationship during a period of 8 years when she joined the show. And I think I may be the first person who ever really tackled Cody and Annie and their relationship. But the book is finished. I'm not really writing it now. I'm tweaking it now. I've let a few other readers take another look at it. That's vital to have other author friends who can look. An editor did work on it. I did send it out to agents and they weren't interested. I don't know if it's because guns are not a popular topic for the liberal establishment. Annie certainly was an exhibition shooter. She wasn't really a gun toter, but we'll see. I'm going to keep going with that. I'm not sure what I'll do with it.
You've got great stories.
Thank you. I mean, that is a really interesting story. And by the way, these are all backstage stories because I've decided my niche is to write backstage stories to write about the performing arts in fiction. That's my niche. It helps people understand, it helps people understand what it takes to be in the theater. And having been in the theater for 7 years myself, I know what goes into it.
I think we all want to hear the backstage stories. We want to know what's happening behind the scenes. When I was about 12, my parents took me to New York and I got to see Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl and Ginger Rogers in Hello, Dolly. So that's
exciting.
That set the rest of my theater going life.
Absolutely. That's the top of the heap.
Yeah. It really was.
Well, what I loved learning was that Richard Burton had built a bar in his dressing room to the tune of $800,000. I mean, that's a lot of money. And Mike Nichols would come over every night and watch Burton do the close of Camelot, which is the one that is the tearjerker. When he says, don't let it be forgot that once there was a spot for one brief shining moment that was known as Camelot, but of course, tears. And then they'd repair to his dressing room. Now, at first, when I read that to drink, I thought it was funny. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. Where could Richard Burton and Mike Nichols go drinking? And then Laurence Olivier might come in and Elaine May. Where could they all go without being totally accosted? Nowhere. That made sense.
Well, let's continue with your wonderful stories by your telling us about the passages that you've brought to share today, and then read from your book so we can hear your tone and voice.
Well, I am so thrilled to be able to read the very beginning of my book. My book is, as I said, about a young production assistant, Jane Conroy, who never wanted to be an actress. Always wanted to go into production. And Jane is a woman way ahead of her time. At the time my book is written in 1960, only 1 in 3 women worked outside the home. but Jane wanted to be in production. And so this is her at the very beginning as she's sending out her resume. She's just moved to New York, and she is in the Hotel Piccadilly coffee shop. The Hotel Piccadilly was a great old hotel that was knocked down to build the Marriott Marquis. I went there many times, and I actually stayed there. Julie Andrews stayed there when she did The Boyfriend. So she's going to the coffee shop, and she's going to see an interesting young man who will play a very big role in her future. And the title of my first chapter is Two Big Breaks, because right now it is at Jane's point of view. Later it will be Bryce Christmas's point of view. Yes, Bryce Christmas. I knew an actor named David Christmas, and I vowed that one day I would have a character named Christmas. It's a real name. It's entitled Two Big Breaks, and it says, Jane. I don't have psychic powers, but at various times in my life, I felt a prickle along my neck when something big was about to happen. Although such moments have been rare, I had one that late August day in 1958 as I whirled through the revolving door of the Hotel Piccadilly coffee shop on West 45th Street. Bathed in sweat after a long trek from Murray Hill, I claimed a wobbly table and grabbed a few napkins from the dispenser to wipe my face. Then I removed my straw hat and white gloves, which proper ladies wore back then, and glanced at the menu I knew by heart. I'd come here once a week since July, and the joint was filling up with tourists and regulars, most of them chatting in pairs. But everything seemed normal, and I had to wonder if my neck barb had come not from a moment of prescience, but from the baking heat of summer in New York. The Piccadilly was in the heart of the bustling theater district, and its coffee shop was the one place I felt at ease in my adopted city. I'd read somewhere that most Broadway producers lunched elsewhere, Sardi's or Cafe Edison. But on different days, I'd spotted David Merrick with his shaving brush mustache and skinny Hal Prince on the red-topped stools at the counter. And since those two guys had hits on Broadway, I longed to hand them my resume, which I carried in a black Coach shoulder bag, a graduation gift from my parents. Having landed here in June with a newly minted drama degree, I hoped to snag a theater job, but so far had only found the nerve to send out letters. Would producers get irked if I interrupted their meal, or would they praise my chutzpah, a Yiddish word I'd recently learned? I didn't know, but neither Merrick nor Prince had looked approachable, so my courage took a powder. When a scowling waitress with iodine-tinted hair lumbered over, I ordered ham on rye and a Coke, no ice. Feeling famished, I always skipped breakfast. I craved a side of fries, but it was hard to make it on a junior secretary's pay, so thrift was essential. Yet, while this shop cost more than the coffee shop at the Barbizon, the women's hotel I'd chosen to please my folks, I never tired of its crowded, noisy atmosphere. Then, after lunch each week, I strolled the narrow streets of the 40s, browsing theater marquees and display cases as another girl, one who liked clothes and jewelry, might window shop on Fifth Avenue. But my passion was Broadway, and it still amazed me that I lived in a town where plays and musicals were performed every night. The waitress brought my Coke in a tall glass brimming with ice, and it was clear she hadn't heard my request over the din. The shop was getting full, and for some reason I missed my college roommate, Sarah Wilkins, an aspiring singer-actress who should have been auditioning for the fall season. Sadly, Sarah's parents had whisked her home to Albany after graduation and made her take a job in a bakery. It smells so sweet in there, I get headaches, she'd groused in a recent letter. But I'm squirreling away every dollar and will join you soon at the Barbizon. Recalling my friend's wistful words, I felt glad I'd banked my birthday checks from relatives for the last decade. I'd used my savings to relocate from Maryland and pay my bills while searching for work. Of course, Sarah's inability to plan was part of her charm, and I missed her spontaneity. Who could forget the time the waitress slapped my sandwich on the scarred wooden tabletop along with the check, wrenching me back to the present. I took a demure bite of ham while watching a tall, 30-ish man slide onto a stool at the counter. He was pressed and starched with dark, wavy hair. It might have been an ad exec or stockbroker. Too well built for a model. But he carried a light green canvas messenger bag instead of a briefcase, and from his straight posture and melodic voice, I strained to hear him order. I guessed he was an actor and maybe a singer. My waitress with the orange hair promptly brought the guy's burgers and fries, grinning at him with dingy dentures, and I chuckled at the woman's attempt to flirt. While the actor drenched his food in Red Wing ketchup, the off-brand the Piccadilly served, I decided he was a looker, at least from this angle. After wolfing down my sandwich and tossing coins on the table, I grabbed my hat and gloves and walked to the door, where a playful impulse stopped me. Instead of leaving, I turned and zinged the guy with my best smile. And unlike the waitress, I had nice teeth. By dumb luck, he was looking my way, and as our eyes met, he returned my smile, flashing nicer teeth than mine. In that instance, I knew why he drew me like a magnet. Everything about him told me he belonged here. He wasn't a newcomer like me or a visitor from the hinterlands. Theater was in his marrow, and I yearned to ask him how that felt. But I lost my chutzpah just like with the producers and raced out the door, my floral dress swirling around my now squishy knees. His smile had unstitched me. I fled down 45th, passing the Plymouth and Golden Theaters, swerving left at 8th Avenue, then skirting the Manhattan Hotel and turning up 44th. As I hurried along this fabled block, passing the Majestic Theater, then Sardi's Restaurant, I realized I'd never flirted with a stranger before, and I had to wonder if my telltale prickle had been about him. Lordy, Jane, get a grip. By the time I reached Broadway, with its camera-toting tourists and yellow cabs careening in and out of lanes, I'd put the actor, if he was an actor, out of my mind. As the traffic light changed, I ignored the pulsing neon signs above Times Square and dashed through the crosswalk with other pedestrians. Then I raced up 44th. If I made a beeline to my office, I might reach my desk before my boss, a fiend for punctuality, left her tidy inner sanctum and noticed I was late getting back from lunch.
That's a great beginning.
Thank you.
You drew us right in.
Thank you. It was so funny because when I started writing the book, that came to me, that Jane had to see Bryce right away. Now, do you believe in love at first sight? I think it's possible. And they had love at first sight.
At least love with the looks at first sight.
Yeah. I mean, and then, of course, what happens next is she goes to, she's hired for Camelot, and she has to help her boss, her new boss, learner's assistant, Brock Remsen is his name, get the actors prepped for their auditions. And she walks into the backstage of this theater. It was the 46th Street Theater where Hamilton's playing now. Who does she see but Bryce? He's come to audition for Sir Lionel. He gets the part.
Well, Susan, I would be remiss speaking to a publicist if I didn't ask you if you have had any publicity that's worked for you or something that you've tried that didn't work.
Well, it's interesting. You should mention that. I'm very glad you asked. I have done a lot of publicity. I have used a book publicist in Georgia. I've used a regular publicist in New York City who specializes in books but also does other things. I've used another publicist in New Jersey. The publicist in Georgia got me some blogs and some articles. The publicist in New York did my Bookstagram campaign, and she got me 30 Bookstagrammers writing about my book, and I felt that worked very, very well. It's very hard to crack Instagram otherwise. And she also helped me run some ads. They worked. The publicist in Jersey was unable to get me anything. She was using the old-fashioned method of sending out a press release and a pitch letter to regular media. Well, one of the problems is, as you probably know, Julia, there are about 3 million books out there now. So it's very hard for someone who's hybrid published, especially, or self-published, to break through. I think the people in the mainstream are getting some publicity from their houses, and even they have to work hard at it. So you have to come up with more innovative ways to reach the public. Podcast is definitely one. But Bookstagram, I think, is one way. Interestingly enough, ads work incredibly well, provided you have good quotes. I happen to get some really good indie journal reviews. I got one for myself, and I got 4 from the Atmosphere Press team. They did a great job. And I got a Kirkus review that was outstanding. They got me that. So I would always use the Atmosphere team as my beginning, but then I wouldn't try to do regular media again, I don't think. I think I would go with Bookstagram and ads and podcasts. Does that help?
Yes, that's great advice. I think a lot of people are sucked into the social media world and don't know really how to navigate it. But I do think the Bookstagrammers, that's a great tip.
That's what they do. What they're there for is to share their knowledge of books. So that's vital. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. But I find that I mostly talk to people I know. I don't know that I'm necessarily reaching a different audience. Here's something I'm going to do next time. I am starting a newsletter through Substack. This was recommended by a very famous writing coach, marketing coach, Dan Blank. He's telling us all we need to find our readers. Isn't that true? We need to find a few readers that really want to know about our topic. That's what I'm going to work on for the next year, finding those readers and then letting them know, oh, by the way, I put my old book out again, my first novel, and it's for you.
It seems like you would have a built-in audience with all the theater goers and as well as all of those in theater, community theater, high schools, all of those people would love to read these books as well.
I have to find them though. The theater press, for the most part, was not too responsive to my book, which shocked me. But part of the problem was that Camelot did return to Broadway this spring in a revival with a new book by Aaron Sorkin. I saw it. It was very interesting. But the critics were not welcoming and the show closed. And so it didn't help me.
There's so much timing in this business. So much
My
timing.
book came out when it was on Broadway, and that helped a little, but then it closed. And what's unfortunate about that? There probably won't be another major Camelot production. And by having it be so poorly reviewed, it deprived a lot of young people, I think, from getting to see Camelot for the first time. And so I was sad about that. And I think Sorkin did a very interesting job, and so did the director, Bart Scher.
Well, Susan, this has been a great visit, but as always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
I certainly do. You've lived a rich life, use it. Draw on everything that's happened to you. Some things in your life may not be fun, but use them anyway. You're going to get a whole new understanding of what's happened to you in your life by putting it into your fiction. And a lot of what's happened to me is in my fiction. So that's what I would advise people. And don't give up. Keep writing. Writing is a joy and a pleasure in its own, for its own sake. It doesn't have to be published to be a joy and a pleasure. When it belongs to you, sometimes that's the most pleasant part of all.
I find that to be so true, and I'm just so appreciative of your time with us today and talking about your fascinating books and the one to come. And we're excited to say that you're now one of our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julia. This has been a great blast. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing, and remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.